Meghan Markle has been pushing a relaunch super hard all year of 2025. The biggest and most notable, of course, is her Netflix show with Love Meghan, which, now that the initial buzz and critiques and whatnot have simmered down, we are still only on episode 3 on my channel here because I'm slow to get things out. But it's clear the PR impact that it has had, her public relations impact, her sort of press and media coverage cumulatively of this project so far, the criticisms and reactions, the reviews and critics, the horrible Rotten Tomatoes score have, been calculated, and we've been able to take stock of that, and the public's reaction to it in general, people's reception of it, including their viewership, but also just the temperature about Meghan in general can be gauged at this point. So how was this show for Meghan when it came to her public image, her attempts at rehabilitating her public image to some degree, and trying to scratch or claw back a little bit of popularity that she has devastatingly lost since leaving the royal family? The biggest question is, was this the right type of show and format for the Meg? Because it didn't exactly work. It has not been received well. We know, we've been covering it, how it hasn't really gone down well, and people aren't buying this new version of the Meg, the rebrand. There's been too many of them. But the show itself, the format, it's not exactly the fact that Meghan tried to do a show, just in general, that's the biggest problem. It's the type of show she's tried to do, the format of this show. That might be the biggest reason why this didn't exactly work. I mean, maybe not the biggest. The biggest reason might just be the Meg herself. But from a business and PR perspective, the format of the show wasn't great because her reputation, most prominently, is that of a difficult person. Somebody who's hard to work with, who doesn't really get along with others very nicely, doesn't play well in working environments, kind of rigid and overly sensitive and overly controlling of how everybody is supposed to react to her, which is 100% in agreement and full support at all times. The bad/mean boss reputation, being incredibly bossy in a negative way and not in a positive way. Remember, we have seen countless times, countless examples where she was bossing around people in an inappropriate and bizarre manner, being rather pushy and overbearing, controlling, even sort of obsessive. And of course, hanging over all of this is the dark cloud that she made for herself with Oprah and Netflix of her manipulative, untruthful ways, and therefore being a rather untrustworthy human being. Because these are all adjectives and examples that we have of what we know of Meghan so far that have been corroborated. And it would be safe and logical to assume these things have merit and are pretty true because statistically, having that many examples and instances of these negative traits would be highly unlikely if they were not true. So, therefore, that is our starting point. And because of that, the format of this show that centers around Meghan showing her guests how to do things that she is not an expert in, not only doesn't make great sense, but it didn't work well at all. Because the Meg came off very bossy at certain points, and in particular seemed to get rather irritable towards some of her guests, so far most notably towards Mindy. Even though Mindy was desperately trying to bring what Meghan asked, which was praise and questions about Meghan, and let's just talk about Meghan the whole time, right? Which means this show really did nothing to counter the information that we have about Meghan's personality at this point. It did nothing to counter this sort of reputation of being bossy and difficult and not very nice and things like that. So it didn't provide at the end of the day, no matter how hard Meghan tried, it didn't provide a different version of Meghan to the audience. It only reinforced much of what we already knew and showed us her ability to try to portray something else and fail at it. Bad acting. Had she been capable of guiding rather than bossing around, the way we've seen Ina Garten do with her guests or certain other celebrity chef moments. They kind of guide their guest in something, and it feels a lot more friendly and a lot more collaborative and a lot less judgy. That could have helped. But the way Meghan approached it just came off really bossy. And that could have been helped by the director if he would have maybe, pushed a little bbit towards a different approach, or the producers in general. But I guess Meghan was like the main producer. So that there wasn't much hope to challenge her vision for this show, really. Michael, the director, that's his name, right? Yeah, Michael Steed, the director, he ultimately is trying to deliver what the producers ask for. And since Meghan produced it, she's definitely got a lot of control over this project. So it's safe to assume this is how she wanted to do things, and this is what her vision was. But it wasn't the right vision or the right approach if her goal was to actually sell a rebrand, and if her goal was actually to shift the public opinion about her and show a different side to herself and sort of change these ideas around her that she is sort of got a lot of negative personality traits that are off-putting, rather, to put it one way. So if her goal was to try to shift that and step away from those off-putting traits, she should have gone with a different format. So largely the responsibility for that failure to accomplish a change in her public image should go on Meghan's shoulders because she is the producer and the star of the show. Michael could have done a little bit as the director, but not a ton. Really, it was down to the concept, and that comes down to Meghan. Having friends and guests on the show was a good idea. That aspect of the format of the show was a positive because it allowed her the opportunity, setting aside the fact that she kind of failed to reach potential here, it provided Meghan the opportunity to be a little bit more dynamic and friendly, to show a different side of herself. It opened up the door to having different types of conversations and being more warm, to showcase a more personable and friendly and charismatic vibe. And that can take a little pressure off the host, in this case Meghan. It can take a little pressure off the host of the show and be able to push a little bit more of the show onto the guest. Like, you're wanting to learn more about the guest, you're wanting the guest to do more talking, more sharing about them. That's always a likable thing too, whenever if you're in a social situation and you're a little nervous, or you're not super confident with conversating or conversing. If you're not confident in the dynamic or the space that you're in, or you just don't know a lot of people, so you're a little unsure, just getting other people to do the talking is always going to be the safe bet. You come off a little bit more likable. You avoid looking like you're doing too much talking or unnecessary sharing, those sorts of egotistical vibes. You avoid that altogether, and you're putting the attention on those around you, and you simultaneously get to learn more about the people you're with at any given moment, which is always a good thing, and there's always something interesting to learn about others. So in that dynamic, in theory, it would be beneficial for Meghan because she could spend more of her time asking people things and getting her guests to do the talking. But she didn't. She didn't take that opportunity. Puzzlingly, this show didn't fulfill that. It didn't have that because she's not a very good conversationalist. She doesn't volley back to whomever it is that she's speaking to. And she didn't really have entertaining, warm conversations that made you feel like you were part of that group. That's something that a lot of really successful hosts in this sort of genre have, like Stanley Tucci's, Searching for Italy or something like that. That was such a good show. I think it was on CNN. I wish it would come back. That was such a beautiful show. It was one of my favorites. I was excited for every episode and every season, and it's ended, which is sad. Anthony Bourdain had it. We had talked about that. Ina Garten definitely has it. And lots of other successful cooking and sort of homemaking lifestyle content creators have it. A lot of people say Rachel Ray does a really good job of this. I don't watch her show very much, so I can't really speak to that for sure. But a lot of people say she has that warm dynamic, that does a lot of welcoming and friendly vibes with her guests where they get to do a lot of the talking. And when you have that, particularly with like Stanley and Ina and Anthony, you feel like you're almost at the table with these people listening in on a very interesting conversation that's engaging, and you want to hear more from the guests and you want to hear that back and forth. And it has a good pace to it, and it makes you feel like you're there. This just didn't have that. It felt bland and cold, and very much so mostly overthought. It felt contrived. It felt overworked, overdone, overly tweaked. It kind of reminded me of some of the films we've seen lately that have, and shows that had one idea as the project started, and then they had to pivot and change it for whatever reason. And then we got something that felt pieced together and overly edited, like you were cutting and pasting a picture that had been torn apart back together. It's not quite right. It didn't quite work. It kind of felt like that. Like they did all the filming and then the editing, and then Meghan got in there and started reworking things or wanting things to be different, or the test groups came back with some feedback and they were trying to salvage it. That's what a lot of the episodes felt like. And with the conversation, it was very much that way. There's reports now from insiders that worked on the show that Meghan had to put in voiceovers after the fact of asking questions to her guests because she didn't ask them any questions. And so when they were offering up information or talking, they were just kind of, it was an awkward silence, and then they were like, well, I did this when I was a kid, or oh, I know about this thing or the other thing, and they made Meghan do voiceovers to make it seem like she was asking, to try to make her seem less self-centered, which is embarrassing. Even if it's not true, it's embarrassing press to have out there. And if it is true, I mean, it's not surprising to anybody who's followed Meghan's, story or journey, really, or who've, paid much attention, but regardless, that could have been helped by changing the way she approached conversations with the guests and putting more of the focus on the guests. So while that element of the show was a good idea of having friends and guests, that was a good idea. And it did help. Like in episode 3 with Roy, it was the best episode because he was there and offering actual value and information about the things he was cooking. And that really did make a difference to the show at the end of the episode, of feeling like you saw something that was at least interesting and, showed you something new that you didn't already know. Not like rebagging pretzels, which we already know about because we all figured it out. We've done it our whole lives. Roy's episode was something different and new. And so if that format would have been enhanced with better conversations, it would have helped. But she fell short there. Another thing about this series that really came up short and sort of undermined its efforts for Meghan was her lack of expertise and lack of interesting ideas. This also contributed to the inability to help create a better version of Meghan to be presented to the public, to change people's perception of her as a human. Because it put a lot more weight on Meghan just carrying the show with herself, like just her personality and her charisma and her as a person. The approach that she took put all of the weight on the show on her, because the recipes were lacking. The tutorials were so basic and common sense that they were incredibly boring. It was mostly common sense stuff that they didn't even need a tutorial at all. Like, who can't figure out how to pop popcorn or make a balloon arch? What? Who can't figure that out, okay? Show me the people who need a tutorial on that and who will actually find their way to Meghan's thing instead of a video on YouTube for free, okay? Ridiculous. So the content itself was ill-suited to the audience, but additionally, because it lacked substance and because she wasn't bringing any value in terms of the actual content itself, of interesting tutorials that are useful or recipes that are new or useful, she lacked that. She lacked letting the guests take some of the weight by not engaging them in valuable or interesting conversation. So then the entire show was on her shoulders. She needed to be incredibly entertaining and dynamic to make this format work, and she wasn't. A public relations analysis during the show concept and planning phases would have surely found this format to be rather high risk because of those factors, and could have laid out a better guidance for her, or a better template for her of like, okay, if you really want to do this format of show, then you need to come in with questions the way a normal talk show person has questions on a card of what they're going to ask the person that they're interviewing, so that they don't get lost or fumble or just not have an entertaining conversation. She needed to come in with talking points that would have interest to the viewers and be entertaining to listen to, better substance on her tutorials and her ideas of what they were actually going to show and include in the episodes. That would have helped make this more possible and more successful. And if they had done a public relations or public image analysis while planning, they would have caught this and been able to avoid it and been like, this is going to come across this way. This runs a high risk of coming across this way. Let's try to safeguard against that risk and lower that risk and make it a little bit more balanced. But because of that, and none of that was done, and none of those conversations were had, or if they were, Meghan just ignored them, it gave a lot more opportunity to fail and a lot more chance to not come across the way they wanted it to. And it gave a very low return in that she wasn't offering up anything worth our time anyway. So even if she weren't charismatic, or if she was super bossy, if her ideas were great and the results were impressive, or the recipes or tutorials were new and valuable, it still would have had a better chance by a lot because of undeniable skill, like Chef Ramsay or even Martha Stewart clearly are kind of perfectionists with their craft. You know, Chef Ramsay sometimes is a little abrasive, or a lot of people don't like his personality or his approach. I don't mind it, but a lot of people do. And some people think Martha is a little bit uptight or a little too particular with her approach. But it shows the skill and the knowledge that she has, and that she's willing to go the extra mile to make it perfect, to make it the product good in the end. Then you can't deny the skill that is there. And so the, people who were maybe off put by the personality, or, didn't quite click with the charisma of the host, that isn't as important as the skill and the value that they're bringing. So if Meghan had better value, it would have lowered the weight that was put on her charisma. And if she would have upped her game with the guests, it would have lowered the amount of weight that was put on her shoulders with carrying the show on just charisma and personality alone, which was lacking. Unfortunately, this project has only been yet another example of a failed endeavor for Meghan. The content itself can't ride on just having pretty shots or soft living examples, and it certainly can't ride on one of the most disliked public figures of all time. So when it comes to her public image, she ultimately worsened her social reputation, that she really isn't very charming. She is bossy, and she is self-centered. She didn't care to learn about the guests, and she didn't care about the viewers enough to deliver them any value. Perhaps if the goal was exclusively to market herself as the it socialite of Montecito specifically, or if her goal was to elevate herself to the level of Goop, Gwyneth Paltrow, I don't know, it may have had some degree of success in that little tiny bubble. And if that was the means to the end for her, then fine. I guess she got what she wanted. She showed her Montecito friends that she really does have a Netflix deal, and maybe that's all she really wanted. Maybe it really is a smaller scale for Meghan. Maybe she really doesn't care to appeal to the plebs of the world. We don't really know. But when it comes to her public image, it definitely didn't work out well. It ended up giving a lot more ammo, so to speak, for criticisms. And in this case, at a much greater scale and with much more legitimacy and sort of an undeniable legitimacy. Before, people had to do a little bit of digging to figure out or learn about the goings on with the Meg, to verify that she had been lying on Oprah and in Netflix, that she was being difficult when she was with the royal family, that she did treat people poorly, that there was valid bullying reports that she was not being nice to certain female members of staff. People had to sort of investigate Meghan's history and the stories about her to verify which side was right. Now, people can just plainly see that she made a terrible Netflix show that bombed and was panned by critics and audience alike, and a failure of this nature on this scale is a really big deal. Her profile of projects are all one-off and letdowns and failures and abandoned ideas, and it's a long list now, and this is the most high profile and expensive of them all. So it's bad news career-wise, like trajectory-wise, as well as public image. And it's one of those situations where it's like, well, if you don't know if you like Meghan or not and you watch this show, chances are you're either going to be bored, find it to have very little value, or you're going to come away from it not really liking her because she just didn't come across authentic and whatnot. And so it was a bigger risk, public relations-wise. Even more so, I would say, than some of her versions of events that she had said about the royal family. Because even though Oprah was a huge scale and the Netflix documentary was a huge scale, people still, who were casual observers, didn't know the backstory and had to take it upon themselves to go and find the other side to those stories, or the truth at the center of those stories. We're not talking about facts that have happened and truths that have happened and Meghan's version and everyone else's version of events. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about delivering a Netflix show that is a creative project, and it fell short in almost every metric. And so an audience who doesn't know anything about all the other nonsense and never would research the facts about Meghan's tall tales will just see this. This is it. And so there was a lot riding on making it a success for Meghan. And even the marketing of the show wasn't a huge problem. It really came down to the content itself. A giant, nearly 8-hour nothing burger. And her performance being dull and boring and unfriendly for lack of interest in her guests and simply egotistical. That's the impression she left the viewers with. So it really fell short when it came to a public image or PR exercise, trying to shift her vibe, because she did introduce this as the new version of Meghan that we're all supposed to get on board with. Leave it in the comments what you think. Thank you for joining me for today's video. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye.